In this video, we'll talk about Spring MVC Framework, which is the model view controller framework, and we'll also talk about how entities can be made in a Java or a Spring Boot application. So, in the previous video, we talked about how we can create a simple REST controller, and we also talked about how we can actually create a Spring Boot project. And in this video, we'll actually dive deep into the concepts behind a REST API and behind how Spring Boot actually is used to implement a REST API and all the magic that happens behind the scenes when you open a website. So, what is a business service and what is a controllers and why do we make controllers and what's the abstraction? So, we'll talk about all of that in this video and the upcoming videos. So the main topic for this video is going to be Spring MVC Framework, which is a model view controller framework. And after that, we'll actually start implementing our REST API, which is a to-do list API. So we'll talk about how we can implement a to-do entity, and we'll see how that interacts with the rest of our application in the future videos. So let's begin. So first, we talk about the Spring MVC framework. So the Spring Web MVC framework provides something called as a model view controller architecture, and it's already ready with components that can be used to develop flexible and loosely coupled web applications. So it's not tightly coupled. So you have a lot of things which you can optimize and customize according to your needs, and you don't have to always follow something which is opinionated. So what are the three things inside the MVC framework? So the first is the model. So as you can see here, the model encapsulates the application data, and in general, they will consist of POJO. So POJO is a plain old Java object. So usually model is basically a database. So you're a Java object. So if you have a plain old Java object, that is then converted into a row in your database or a database schema, and then we use that to actually talk to our application, talk to the controller, or talk to the view using a model. So the model basically encapsulates the data which the application uses. So here in our to-do list example, which we're going to actually implement, the model is going to be the name of the task in the to-do list, the summary of the to-do list, and the description of each task in the to-do list. So yeah, that is what model is. The next is view. So the view is responsible for rendering the model data, and in general it generates HTML output that the client's browser can interpret. So let's map the understanding of view with what we're going to implement. So view generally is considered of the HTML output. So basically this framework which you see here, this website which you see here, whatever the buttons and everything is the view of the application by tutorial's point. But since we will be creating a REST API, our view is going to be simple JSON, JavaScript object notation. So that is going to be our view, which can be interpreted by some browsers and some not. But we'll be using Postman, which is used for handling APIs. So we don't have to worry about the view as of now. The next and the most important part, I feel, is the controller. So the controller is responsible for processing requests and building an appropriate model and passing it to the view for rendering. So the controller takes in the data from the model and then has the business logic inside it or the business service, and then it passes it to the view for rendering. So what happens behind the scenes? So the Spring Web MVC framework is designed around a dispatcher servlet class that handles all the HTTP requests and responses for you. So you don't have to worry about all of that. You can just focus about your problem which you want to solve. So the workflow is as follows. So after receiving an HTTP request, so let's say you have a GET request where you want to get some data from the server. Let's say you want to get all the tasks in the to-do list. So the dispatcher servlet consults the handler mapping to call the appropriate controller. So the controller here is going to be get to-do list or get all to-dos. Now the controller takes the request and calls the appropriate service methods based on the used get or post method. So we will be having a service method which actually talks to our database or talks to our model to actually get that data and then give it back to the view. So the service data will set model data based on defined business logic and returns view name to the dispatcher servlet. Now, the dispatcher servlet will take help from view resolver to pick up the defined view. So we don't have to worry about this step for our implementation because we'll be having a JSON output. Now, once the view is finalized, the dispatches servlet passes the model data to the view, which is finally rendered on the browser. So all the above components, the handler, mapping, controller, are parts of the web application context, which is an extension of the plain application context. So we'll talk about all of these annotations and all of this context in the future videos, but just remember this diagram and how the MVC works. So M is model, your data mainly. View is how we actually see the application. So we'll be having simple JSON objects in our view for now. And controller is where you actually handle requests and figure out the business logic for your application. Great. So we'll be building our web application around the MVC framework. So we need to know how this works before we actually dive into the implementation. Now let's start actually building our to-do list REST API using Spring Boot. So let's close the hello package. So we don't want to use this. So it's just an example. And let's actually create a new package. So go to src main java in your to-do list. Go to new. Go to package. And this is going to be to-do list dot to-do. So this is what will be named our package. You can name it anything, but I think this is the most easiest one to name. And next we need a simple class. So now the first thing which we have to do is create an entity, a to-do entity. So an entity is basically a real world object in database. So in databases, it's a very common thing to talk about entities, and we'll be mimicking that in a Java class. So this class will contain all the information about a to-do object, right? A to-do entity. So what will the to-do include? So a to-do or a task will include an ID, a unique ID, which can be used to access any of the to-dos or the tasks. It will have a name. So the name of a to-do, for example, create a YouTube video or finish the project assignment. So the name of your to do. The next is going to be the summary or a very short gist of what the task is about. And if you actually have a really important task to do, then you will also have a description which you can actually elaborate how you are actually going to uh, finish the task or what the task consists about. So let's start making our to do entity. So we'll just call it to do. So to do and press finish. Great. So we have our to-do class here now, and let's add some things which we talked about here. So the first thing which we need is a unique ID. So integer ID. Next is string name. So this is all we need inside our entity, but we also need to have setters and getters in simple Java concept for this class, and also have a constructor. So let's do that now. So what we do is go to source and click on generate getters and setters, and let's select all because we need it for all of them, and click generate. And yeah, we have it here. So pretty neat, pretty simple method of doing it. And now what we need are two constructors. So we need an empty constructor and we need a parameterized constructor. So let's make that now. Go to source and generate constructor using fields. Select all and done. So now we have a parameterized constructor here, and we need to actually make sure that this also has an empty constructor because it makes it easier later. So let's copy this now. And let's remove all of this to make it empty. And great. So now here we have a to-do entity. So It has the ID, name, summary, description. It has constructors, and we have getters and setters. So if you ever want to make a task, this is the class or the object of this class is what we'll be using to create our to-do list objects. So yeah, that was it for this video. We talked about the MVC framework. We talked about model, which encapsulates application data. We talked about the view and controller. So view is going to be JSON for now, and the controller is where all the business logic and mapping of the requests happen. And the dispatcher servlet also helps you behind the scenes to actually handle all of this for you. So yeah, after that we talked about the entity which we'll be using to make our API. So this is a very basic entity. So everything that happens inside the application will be using this to actually make our tasks in the to-do list. So we'll have a unique ID, name, summary, and description. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.